Hello kind people of YouTube and welcome back to another video. If you're waiting for my main news update video for the day, that is coming later. But just right now I just want to talk about one thing, and that is this article from Ethereum World News. Ripple's XRP way undervalued the firm's impact on the coin. Well, it says to the coin, but I think they mean on. And if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I believe XRP is undervalued and has immense future potential, but I just thought it was interesting to take a look at an article that makes this same claim, but that does it quite differently from how I would do it. So I just wanted to read this article with you guys, look at the arguments, see what I might have to add and how well this holds up. So let's take a look here. And it is of course linked in the description if you want to read it yourself. When time of great price decline comes by, many traders and crypto enthusiasts equal the cryptocurrency's ecosystem value with its price performance against a certain traditional currency. However, if certain virtual currencies are detached and analyzed one by one, out of the leading coins there are those that showcase true present undervalue for what they offer or will deliver in the future when it comes to technological potential towards finding various solutions in various industries. So, up until this point I'm perfectly on board. One of the most talked about coins, the second by market cap, XRP, could be standing at the peak of what we may call usefulness when it comes to blockchain cases. Right now, maybe midterm, it has no use case for each individual specifically and directly. However, for many financial institutions, it might have been the door key towards grasping and opening up the blockchain-based solutions and cryptos. Here, once again, I think they're more or less on the right track, but what I would say here is that it's not that XRP has no use case for the individual. It's just that when you're looking at the functionality that any random people might be using XRP for right now, the end user, the main investor, the crypto sphere, that would typically be making transactions. And for that, other cryptocurrencies simply are more interesting at the moment. But that is of course not what XRP has been developed to be. Now XRP is in many ways equivalent to many major cryptocurrencies in its core properties as far as peer-to-peer transactions are concerned, and it is very much just as useful as a lot of other tokens in that regard. But the main purpose of XRP, and that isn't to say that it cannot do other things, but the main purpose is to serve as a new form of liquidity tool for international transfers. And in that, it will primarily be used by banks and by financial institutions, not directly by end users. So one thing you often see is a lot of people look at XRP, and because it's not meant for them directly, they don't quite know what to do with it. Now, if you look at most other cryptocurrencies, they have a direct use case for the end user, while XRP is more intended for being a mediary thing. XRP is being used by companies that you use, not used by you directly, while if you're dealing in Bitcoin, you're probably making direct transactions. If you're dealing with EOS or Ethereum, you're probably either making direct transactions or using a dApp built on top of it or a smart contract. If you're dealing with a privacy coin, you're using that for your personal transactions. While XRP can do that, that is not primarily what it's for. So a lot of people just look at it in the top 10 coins and they just wonder, what does this one do for me? And the answer is, for you personally, not that much. But back to the article. Ripple, the company behind XRP, has been one of the more disruptive crypto firms to enter the space of financial technology and the realm of banking. Its CEO, Brett Garlinghouse, pointed out clearly the firm's goal of delivering speedy solutions which take down friction inherent in completing cross-border transactions to banks and financial entities via blockchain by replacing SWIFT. And his quote, "The technologies that banks use today that SWIFT developed decades ago really hadn't evolved or kept up with the market. SWIFT said not that long ago they didn't see blockchain as a solution to correspondent banking. We've got well over 100 of their customers saying they disagree." And this is a power move, this quote. This is a power move. But the takeaway here is that they are aiming for a massive market that is right now monopolized by SWIFT. And because SWIFT has had that monopoly for 45 years, or almost 45 years, I believe the system was established in 1975. Their system wasn't under pressure from competitors to evolve and to improve. And that is how we now have that situation where over 40 years after SWIFT was established, it has barely improved. SWIFT is still slow, costly, and prone to errors. And that is where a company like Ripple, with a token like XRP and with their blockchain technologies, with their distributed ledger technologies, can scoot in and really disrupt the market. And that is what Ripple is trying to do, and that is the potential of the XRP token. Now, SWIFT alone, and SWIFT isn't all international monetary transfer isn't all cross-border transactions, but they have a large chunk of what happens through banks. SWIFT alone moves $5 trillion a day. Just let that sit for a moment. $5 trillion in money a day is being moved by SWIFT. So if Ripple can get just a tiny portion of the transactions that are currently going through SWIFT, going through their technologies, their Ripple Labs technologies, their X-Current using XRP tokens, or XRapid, which always has to use the XRP token, even if they don't necessarily instantly use the XRP token, if they can just get a small portion of that, that means billions and billions and billions every single day flowing through Ripple's systems. And the ingenious thing behind Ripple's market strategy is that they don't necessarily try to get people directly to use the XRP token. Instead, they have an onboarding process where they get them into RippleNet, which is pretty much the system that combines all the other systems. And from there, a lot of them choose to start using X-Current. Now, X-Current can use the XRP token, but does not have to use it. But the thing is, if they then want to move on to XRapid after being successful, after enjoying their experience with X-Current, XRapid is further faster, cheaper, and that uses the XRP token. So it is an onboarding process to use the XRP token. So just imagine, even if they just get a small amount of market share away from SWIFT, from a conglomerate that has had so little competition so far, that they haven't had to evolve, that they're desperately trying to keep up now that that competition is actually emerging, that is a battle that Ripple can actually, to a certain degree, win. With all the funding they have, with the great team behind them, with all the partnerships they are building up. And I feel like this article doesn't go deep enough into what that means, into how much potential money that is that could be flowing through the XRP token, through Ripple's blockchain technologies. Even if it's just a small portion, even if it's just 1% of those 5 trillion a day, that is 50 billion a day. Right now, the total volume of the crypto markets is 20 billion a day. That is 2.5 times the total daily volume of the crypto markets. That would just be flowing through XRP. That would just be liquidity for XRP. That would just be international monetary transfers. Say you're sending money from Mexico to the US. You would be buying with pesos a certain number of XRP in Mexico. And then, after those XRP are sent to the US, you would then be selling them off for US dollars again there. So that means all of that, all those transactions are going through XRP every single day. And that with just 1% of SWIFT's market cap, if they can just get 1% of international monetary transfers away from SWIFT going through their platforms instead, and keep in mind they are working with about 200 banks already. So that is not unrealistic. That would already be $50 billion a day moving through XRP. Right now, on a good day, we see 1 billion move through XRP. And of course, all that movement represents incredible demand. And you know what happens when demand goes up? Unless supply also increases, that means price increases. And there is very little reason to believe that a supply will also increase. If anything, more people are likely to lock their XRP tokens away, waiting for the price to go up. More companies are going to be required to be holding a certain number of XRP. So it looks like the supply is going to go down and the demand is going to go up, and there's going to be a ton of money moving through it. And that is just if they get a small portion of that. Now, what Ripple has also been doing, they have also been targeting financial channels that don't typically use the SWIFT system. And that is a lot for developing nations where there is no proper banking system in place, where most people do not have access to a bank account. They have also been aiming for that market. There's a lot in that as well. And that is the potential here. But for a moment, let's get back to the article, because I haven't actually read it out fully. Just keeping in mind the above on how useful XRP is and what importance it could take and cement its position in the financial world, the demand and adoption will grow exponentially. In a recent EWN post, it was highlighted how Corey Johnson explained the reason behind very recognizable 2018 growth of the firm and its products. According to him, there is much more behind marketing and the advertising of its operation. To describe it, the chief strategist compared the second largest digital coin with Bitcoin, the pioneer of blockchain, and his quote: Bitcoin has real technological limitations around how many transactions it can do per hour, let alone nobody even talks about per minute. XRP does 1,500 transactions per second. Mining is increasingly expensive and consumes power, and also the way it ineffectively distributes power to the miners. Presently, 80% of all Bitcoin is being mined in China. XRP does not have mining. Now, these are legitimate points, but they're ultimately not the most important thing. Now, in many ways, XRP is a newer generation blockchain, or rather running on a newer generation blockchain, and as such, in many ways, is obviously superior to Bitcoin as far as speed is concerned, as far as efficiency is concerned. And getting rid of mining, of course, removes one of the biggest issues surrounding Bitcoin and surrounding many cryptocurrencies. And we see a lot of cryptocurrencies trying to move from proof of work to proof of stake, because that significantly decreases how much energy is being used. But one of the biggest things that the crypto world is under fire for is just how much electricity mining takes. And nobody can fault you for wondering, for what? Why do we need that? So XRP as a cryptocurrency that isn't mined, of course, has a certain appeal, especially as far as its image is concerned. Because you have to keep in mind here, Ripple is going for the mainstream financial world. They are not trying to convince everyday investors. They're not trying to convince the crypto world to buy their tokens. What they are doing is they're trying to convince banks, to convince huge corporations to use their platforms and their token. And for that, image is important. And you know what is bad for image? If it takes an incredible and unjustifiable amount of energy to create the tokens. No company wants to be involved with that. Nobody wants that floating over their head. So, but ultimately, I think the technological limitations of other cryptocurrencies aren't the most important thing here. Now, XRP, of course, is very capable. And that is important because it has a certain minimum capabilities that it needs in order to be useful. But once it has reached those thresholds, everything else doesn't matter that much. The important thing to know here is XRP is fast, quick, easy enough, cheap enough, and secure enough to be better than the current systems. Much better than what Swift currently has, and that is the important thing. They just need to be better and scalable. Everything else beside that isn't that important. What is really important is what Ripple is doing. Now, they have been trying to distance themselves from the XRP token because, of course, it does exist independently. But the thing is, ultimately, the future of XRP will be decided by how well Ripple as a company does their job of building their infrastructure, growing their systems, advancing their technologies, and getting more and more banks and financial institutions to use their technologies with the XRP token. And that is where my hope for the future of XRP is, and why I think it is so incredibly undervalued, and why I agree with this headline. They are doing so much. They have already established such a network that is growing pretty much. We get some kind of good news surrounding Ripple or XRP pretty much every day. Some new corporation, a statement from someone who says they've been very happy using the system. We get something almost every day. We've had technological upgrades. We had XRP going live just last month, which was a huge step. And if we're just looking at what they're doing, they have $20 billion in funding behind them as well. They have a great team. They are working closely with banks, with regulators. I think Ripple has a bright future. And you know what the side effect of Ripple having a bright future will be? XRP having a bright future. Because that is ultimately, in many ways, Ripple's core aim. Get companies using XRP. Get them on this superior product. Get them using this instead of what they're using right now. Funnel all that money through their infrastructures, through the XRP token. And if you buy XRP while they're low, as they are right now, keep in mind, just of hype alone, before this huge network of banks was in place, before XRP was even live, before XRP really had a real use case, before it was really being used anywhere, it had already gone to $3.80 once in the last bull run. Right now, it's under 50 cents. Now imagine what happens when more and more banks start using it, when all that money is going through the platform, and when the next bull run happens. XRP is way undervalued, and that is just a fact. There is no way around that, and I know a lot of you have issues with XRP and with Ripple. A lot of those, though, I understand them. I definitely understand your concerns. But a lot of those are ideological. And they have very little to do with what future potential it has. Because you can disagree personally with how they set up their blockchain, with what they are doing here. But the thing is, I'm looking at how well they are doing business and how likely they are to succeed and in applying themselves to that. And I'm leaving my personal judgment, my ideological judgment of whether they are doing blockchain like blockchain is supposed to be done by the side. Because you know what? Banks don't care about that. And if you're looking at at whether something is overvalued or undervalued, that is not about what you personally think about it, but what it can do, what potential it has, who's behind it, who's using it. That is what you're looking at. And I think it is hard to deny that XRP is incredibly undervalued right now, and I would say use this opportunity. Now, I'm no financial advisor, of course, do your own research as always, but for me this is very, very clear. And with that, I'm going to end this video. As always, thank you so much for watching. A regular news update where I'm looking at everything that has been going on today, where I'm looking at the markets and stuff, is coming later, of course. And the article is linked in the description. In the description, you will also find my social media links and ways to support the channel if you feel so inclined. Thanks for watching.